Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 10th EPIP webinar of 2014, Grace Under Pressure, How to Build Engagement and Capacity for Action in Distressed Communities. It's Wednesday, July 16th, and I am your EPIP host, Michael Barham. We have a number of fantastic panelists joining us today. Two organizations are very well represented, Community Solutions and the Zilber Family Foundation. We're going to get started and toss it over to them shortly. But before we do, I want to make sure those of you who are unfamiliar with EPIP learn a little bit more about us. We are a national network of foundation professionals and social entrepreneurs who strive for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. We provide a platform for our community to connect with others, learn and practice leadership skills, and voice emerging transformative thoughts in the social sector. Really, we're about collaborating, sharing knowledge, building skills, fueling the passion that obviously many of us have because we're here on this webinar today, and ultimately solving really important problems. So we invite you to learn more about EPIP. Consider joining if you aren't already a member. Feel free to visit the website, epip.org/membership, or contact me, Michael at epip.org. I'm talking about EPIP all day long and happy to share that information and knowledge with those of you who are interested. Couple of announcements. Our next EPIP webinar, 2 weeks from today, Crowdfunding 101. We're going to welcome back a few of our favorite NYU Law and Social Enterprise fellows. Many of you joined us for our Social Impact Bonds webinar. That was really informative and fantastic, and this should be just as informative. We're going to talk about crowdfunding, how it's affecting the social sector at large, and that's Wednesday, July 30th, 3 p.m. Eastern. And as always, to learn about EPIP national events or events taking place near you, visit our website, epip.org/events. Couple of items for housekeeping before we begin. If you are calling in on your phone, be sure to mute your computer. You'll be kept on mute as well. And if you have any technical difficulties, any audio difficulties, you're having trouble hearing the panelists, please use the question box. We'll be monitoring that throughout the webinar. And we're going to reserve some time for Q&A as well, so please feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar. We'll be keeping track of those, taking note, and we'll be sure to address as many as we can towards the end of the webinar. We have about 10 minutes reserved for Q&A. We will be recording this webinar, and last but not least, please be sure to complete the post-webinar survey. That'll come at you right when the webinar ends. We are always looking to improve our webinars and programs, so please take a look at that info. It's less than a 5-minute survey. Okie doke, we are about to get started. Again, we have two fantastic organizations joining us. We're going to begin with Community Solutions. We have 3 staff members from Community Solutions joining. And for those of you who are not so familiar with Community Solutions, they're a nonprofit organization whose work to strengthen communities and specifically end homelessness has been well documented. Some of you may have seen the special on 60 Minutes around their work. In this webinar, we're going to focus on their Brownsville Partnership, which is a network of local organizations and community members seeking to build on existing resources to solve the community's most urgent problems. We're going to hear from Corinne Latorno, who's the Director of Policy, Nupur Chowdhury, the Program Manager for Community Planning and Health, and Jacqueline Kennedy, who's the Coordinator for Community Mobilization. So you all have already heard plenty from me. Without further ado, I am going to toss it over to our Community Solutions team. Hi, folks.
Thanks, Michael. So I'm Jacqueline Kennedy. As Michael said, I'm the mobilization coordinator here at the Brownsville Partnership. And today I want to focus on how we at the Brownsville Partnership focus on building capability, agency, possibility, and hope for residents here in Brownsville. Next. So first of all, let's talk about community solutions and what we do. We take two approaches to our work, and we really focus on working with vulnerable people specifically in hard-hit neighborhoods. So we're a national nonprofit organization, and there's two ways we do this. The first through national campaigns, and really focusing on process improvement, system change. That's evident in our 100,000 Homes campaign that we just finished, and there we housed more than 100,000 homeless individuals. And we're really focusing on how we can be smarter about systems change and more cost-effective, and really seek to globally end a lot of the issues that exist in these vulnerable areas. The second way we do this is really through our neighborhood initiatives. We coordinate collaboratively in areas of concentrated poverty. We have two initiatives, one in Hartford, Connecticut, and the other in Brownsville. And we really try to focus on the issues that most impact these neighborhoods and collectively seek solutions to change, to make community change. So just a little bit about Brownsville. Brownsville is, as you see, located in Brooklyn, and it's really in central Brooklyn, a little east of central Brooklyn. We focus on two specific census tracts, Census Tract 910 and 912, which house most of the public housing in Brownsville. The total population is a bit debatable in Brownsville, but it was reported in 2010 to be about 90,000, but many residents here know it's probably around 100,000, 115, give or take, because there are some unreported residents. So Brownsville is about 2 square miles, and demographically speaking, it's made up of mostly African Americans, but there is a growing Latino and Asian population. Next. So there is a dominant narrative of Brownsville. If you read the newspaper articles, you watch the news, you Google Brownsville, Brooklyn, the dominant narrative is generally quite negative, but there are some very factual information that we do want to highlight here. So 48% of Brownsville residents do receive some type of income support, such as public assistance. 36% of Brownsville families actually live below the poverty line. Many of those residents reside in the public housing that resides in Brownsville. We actually have the highest concentration of public housing in America, with about 18 public housing developments concentrated in those 2 square miles. With that said, 79% of Brownsville children are born into poverty. This, I think, plays a big role in the crime rate. The violent crime rate is really 3 times that of the city average, and that speaks to our youth population. 1 out of every 12 young people ages 16 to 24 are actually imprisoned, are jailed, and this is the highest rate that exists in New York City. So at the Brownsville Partnership, we really focus on building on Brownsville assets. That's the narrative that we try to speak about. So at the Brownsville Partnership, as Michael said earlier, we're a network of about 30 organizations and residents working together to build on the existing assets in Brownsville, and then work with residents and our partners to really identify and create solutions to Brownsville's most pressing and pressing challenges and issues. So we really do that through 3 pillars of that inform our work. So that first pillar is placemaking and physical revitalization. We really try to focus on what temporary and long-term physical changes we can make to the built environment to positively transform the built environment. So what assets exist on a physical basis in Brownsville that can really make change, that can really change how people see and feel the community? One really great example of that is our youth market, as identified in this picture. This is a picture of one of our youth markets on Brockway and Livonia, which is a very high crime, very high activity corner. It's actually in our 73rd Precinct impact zone, so it's highlighted as a high crime area. But July through November, we've kind of transformed what that means to the community. And July through November, it's actually known for the youth market. It's known for fresh fruits and vegetables, for a way for the community to access healthy food and healthy living. So the next pillar is really connecting vulnerable residents to the support and services that they need. We understand that the communities and the population that we work with truly need to be connected to the support that they need. When we entered Brownsville in 2005, we understood that there was a certain level of services that weren't in this community that we needed to make sure to highlight and bring and connect residents to. So one way we do that now is through our Brownsville Neighborhood Empowerment Network, which is a program that really we've employed residents who have gone through these challenges, who have met these challenges and advocated for themselves. So now we've hired them full time to advocate for other residents, connect them to services, and also they have done the work. They've been in the trenches. They've been our mobilizers, our community engagement kind of feet on the ground. So they're very visible, and they really are able to connect residents to the support that they need. And the last way we do this is by building partnerships to tackle these difficult issues. We really think about how we can collectively come up with large, audacious goals and collaboratively meet these goals. One way we've done this is the 100,000 Homes campaign. So taking that model in Brownsville, we've really began to think about what is that one hard-hit issue that will really move the needle and make impact in Brownsville, and that's the unemployment. So we're launching a jobs campaign in August to really tackle this issue, and we're working collaboratively with city agencies, organizations that really want to move the needle on unemployment and jobs. So with that said, within the three main pillars are these two horizontals in which we feel like we really act as a backbone organization, and we make sure to build in mobilization and engagement in everything we do. So we really see these two horizontals as our main role within these three pillars, really being a backbone organization and intertwining community mobilization and engagement in everything we do, because we believe that that's the only way that we can get input and feedback and continually connect the residents to the work that we're doing. Next slide. So next, to talk about backbone and what is a backbone organization, a backbone/quarterback organization, and what is mobilization engagement and how do we do that in the community. Corinne is going to speak.
Thanks, Jackie. As Jackie mentioned, we really see ourselves as a backbone organization in the neighborhood of Brownsville, and we really thought it would be important to highlight what that means to us as the Brownsville Partnership. So some of you might have heard of this term backbone or collective impact or quarterbacking role, but really we see this as kind of a solution in the community development sphere of kind of understanding and knowing that neighborhoods of concentrated poverty have complicated issues, and it takes a holistic approach to kind of move the needle in those issues, and moving the needle in those individual issues shouldn't happen in separated silos. We should really kind of look at the neighborhood as an ecosystem working together, and how do you kind of bring together all the different organizations, government agencies to think collectively about the neighborhood as a whole and be working together. And that's where this backbone concept comes from, is that we see ourselves as the convener, the group bringing all the different people around the table, the group really kind of reaching out to the needed partnerships, the needed services that Jackie referenced. You know, when we started in Brownsville, we started way back in 2005, and we really recognized that there was a need for a variety of services to serve families in the neighborhood. So we kind of rolled up our sleeves and met with some of the best-in-class organizations in New York City and really recruited them to come and work in Brownsville. And now we've recruited over 30 partners that are working collectively together on the ground with us in Brownsville. So we're at this interesting point in our work in Brownsville where we're really starting to define what it means to be that backbone organization. What does it mean to kind of try to seek out groups working together and achieve collective impact? So as the backbone group, we really, you know, we're about establishing the vision, trying to set those clear, collective, and measurable time-bound goals. So what that gets to is, you know, there's a lot of collaboration that can happen through different nonprofit organizations, foundations, government agencies, but how do you really get people to work together when the rubber meets the road? And we think that that's through data. We think that that's through setting goals and measuring the impact of those goals and really looking at the different indicators that the different organizations around the table contribute to reach those goals. And that we would be the clearinghouse of collecting and organizing that data. And we're also the ones who advocate and monitor to look at improving public spaces. So we're trying to look at how do you connect the social development of the neighborhood and the physical development of the neighborhood, and how do you ensure that goals around physical revitalization also align with goals around social development in the neighborhood. And so we see ourselves as a group that can kind of try to bridge those two pieces through some of the work Jackie mentioned, which are those prelude programs around placemaking, but also looking at the entire built environment. This neighborhood is dominated by public housing, and how does the physical space actually affect the neighborhood in not a positive way, and how do we shift that to make it positive? And then this is the big piece that we really think it could be a game changer, is really the process improvement support around the achievement of common goals. And we found this to be very successful in our 100,000 Homes campaign that we referenced and was referenced as shown on 60 Minutes. But really that 100,000 Homes campaign was around bringing all the different players that work on trying to end street homelessness around a table and utilizing the science of process improvement to look at how you can affect actual systems change to reach a goal around 100,000 individuals housed. And so what we're looking at are what are some of the system issues that affect a neighborhood as an ecosystem, and how do we bring process improvement methodologies to affect that change. And then the other really important horizontal that we think is critical to our work is this community mobilization and engagement in everything we do. So it really intertwines and is almost braided together with the backbone work, because when we recruit organizations to come into Brownsville, we often offer community mobilization services, helping them get integrated into the neighborhood. Also, in addition to that, through our community mobilization and engagement, we find that we can listen to the voice of the community, listen to the needs of the community, align that with the administrative data, and that helps reinforce the different organizations we reach out to, how we prioritize services in the community, and how we ensure even in those physical revitalization goals that the vision of the community is met perfectly. And so we do this by actually investing in an entire community mobilization department. Jackie referenced that we hire individuals from the community at a full-time level. They act as resource specialists and also help convene regular communication with the residents and really kind of help listen and kind of create that important feedback loop in the community. So we're really truly partnering not only with different organizations, but truly partnering with community members. So I'm going to stop right there. And I think we're passing this off to the next organization now.
Thank you so much, Corinne. And that was really informative. So thank you, Corinne. Thank you, Jackie. We're going to quickly toss it over to Um, our other panelists at the Zilber Family Foundation, for those of you unfamiliar with Zilber, they are a Milwaukee-based foundation committed to enhancing the well-being of individuals, families, and neighborhoods with a major focus on the Zilber Neighborhood Initiative, which is a 10-year commitment made in 2008 to improve the quality of life for residents in low-income Milwaukee neighborhoods. We have 3 staff members from the Zilber Family Foundation joining us, including Susan Lloyd, the Executive Director, Aaron Frederick, Senior Program Officer, and Gina Still, Senior Program Officer. So without further ado, I will toss it over to Zilber. Hi, folks.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Michael. What I'd like to do is focus on the third element of our mission, which is improving the quality of life in neighborhoods, and our efforts over the years to engage residents and to build the capacity among many different kinds of organizations to effect change in some of Milwaukee's poorest communities. A word about our founder. Joe Zilber was born and raised in Milwaukee. He went to university in Milwaukee. He raised his family in Milwaukee. He established his real estate and development company, which continues this day in Milwaukee. And so, you know, it's important to understand that he had a very visceral feeling for the vital relationship between the quality of life in neighborhoods and a region or a state's economic vitality. And so, you know, a lot of what drives our work is a real practical sense about the relationship of neighborhoods to the larger context within which they work. I want to say a few things about the context of our work, a little bit about how we think about, you know, for lack of a better phrase, our theory of change or our rationale. I'd like to say a word or two about the approach that we take at the neighborhood level, and then turn it over to my colleagues, Aaron and Gina, to talk about the specific work in the communities before we turn over to lessons and Q&A. The work that we do in Milwaukee is very much based on a sense that although Joe didn't use this language, he really was committed to social justice. His driving impulse was really focused on improving the quality of life in neighborhoods as places for human development. So it's a mix of community development and human development. So it's people and place. Joe, as I said, understood real estate markets, but he also was very interested in making sure that all children born in Milwaukee in any neighborhood had the same opportunities for social and economic advancement that he had enjoyed growing up in Milwaukee neighborhoods. And so in 2008, he announced the Zilber Neighborhood Initiative, a $50 million commitment over a 10-year term to improve the life of people in particular places. And so he was absolutely determined that the funding that the foundation would undertake over a 10-year term would improve conditions in neighborhoods and would improve the circumstances of people's lives. Based on 30 years of social science research, 3 decades of community development experience, and most importantly, the lived experience of the people in neighborhoods, we determined that one of the ways that we could support our work is to go beyond traditional community development and look at how those lessons from those 3 arenas of activity, research, community development practice, and people's tacit or lived experience could come together to inform our approach. And so, you know, we determined that it takes a number of different things. One, it takes a committed funder with a long time horizon. It took 20, 30 years for neighborhoods to become seriously distressed. It's going to take at least that long for them to come back. And funders going into this kind of work really need to begin with at least a 10-year time horizon. A second piece that's, a second element of our approach that's vitally important is to understand that at the center are community partners. And we define a community partner as a community-based or local neighborhood organization that is led by a person or a group that is trusted by the people who live in that community. So there's already a strong set of trusted relationships on which to build. We look for leaders who are facilitative, who are not looking to build empires, but instead are the kind of people who do all the grunt work, give all the credit to somebody else, and when there's a mistake, take the blame on themselves. It's really about crediting other people and being brokers of resources into a neighborhood rather than gatekeepers of resources. The second very important element was to bring people together around the development of a quality of life plan. The quality of life plans are 5-year plans for improving conditions in a community, but as important as they are in terms of being blueprints for future activity, the process of bringing people together is what builds and strengthens resident engagement. The quality of life plans are supported by us as well as others. We've made about $20 million worth of investment in community organizations, and those investments have really been driven by a relationship to the quality of life plan. How we give money as well as the timing of that money is very important. We provide operating support, project support, capital investment. We like to stimulate change in neighborhoods, ensure that there's some visible change happening so that residents become further involved in the work that's going on, and that the quality of life plans are really guiding what we're doing, because it's not just the action plan, it's also the process by which they have been developed and the process by which they are implemented. And then finally, the last piece I'll talk a little bit about is the fact that we bring together, as I heard my colleagues in New York say, we bring together a number of different organizations, intermediaries, other funders, cross-community groups to actually support the work in neighborhoods and make sure the plans are implemented. Let me turn to Gina Stilts, who's going to talk a little bit about our work in Lindsay Heights, the neighborhood that Joe grew up in.
Thanks, Susan. So to give you a little context on what Lindsay Heights was like in its origination and as it is today, it was originally settled in the late 1800s by Germans and then Polish and then Russians and Jews, and eventually it became a hub for the city's African-American life. It was the center of culture and business, and it had over 100 African-American businesses along its commercial corridors. But by the 1970s, as is the case in many central city neighborhoods, a series of divestment, redlining, and in particular in Lindsay Heights, a failed freeway project that demolished about 1,200 homes really led to a series of decline in the neighborhood. And so today this area, which we define as 110 blocks, about 2,700 households, many of which have children, over almost half of them are young homes, and it's about 86% African American. And this area is one of the most depressed in the city. It is over half of families are in poverty. It has high incarceration rates. It has high vacancy rates of 20 to 25%, and it contends with a serious health disparity issue, educational attainment that you would expect to be low, and it has, while it has been decreasing in years recently, higher crime rates as compared to the whole city. So when the Zilber Foundation selected Lindsay Heights, it identified a local nonprofit organization called Walnut Way Conservation Corps to be the coordinating agency for that planning and implementation of the quality of life plan. Walnut Way was founded in 2000 by residents, and it was founded to sustain the neighborhood and improve the neighborhood through community organizing, property restoration, and economic development. And while its capacity has grown immensely over the years, it continues to be guided by a resident-driven program planning and implementation focus. And it really excels as a convener of people and institutions, and it really focuses on the issues that were identified by residents in that quality of life plan. Their role as a lead agency and a convener focuses primarily on educating and engaging their residents, the youth and adults in their neighborhoods, around civic and community leadership, continuing the housing restoration and construction, environmental resources and stewardship, and economic development. And one of the areas where they really thrive is on attracting institutional partners to implement the strategies. So Walnut Way is a trusted organization that can convene the residents, and then they also attract other resources from outside their own organization to actually implement plans. A quick example of how they've done this is around their environmental stewardship initiatives. They've really taken a focus on healthy eating and repurposing some of these vacant lots into urban agriculture and gardens. They've succeeded immensely in high production community gardens. They've got orchards in their neighborhoods. And through this, they've also pulled all these various strategies together. So now they have a program within their own organization that's hiring residents to do the landscaping and tend to the gardens. And so they've used one area that was a strategy and convened many partners and residents to implement it in the neighborhood. So this is an important strength in Lindsay Heights. In our other neighborhoods that Erin will talk about, the lead agencies have different strengths. And so I'll turn it over to her to talk about that.
Thanks, Gina. So I think I'm going to talk about Clark Square and Layton Boulevard West neighborhoods. And just before I get into the specifics about the neighborhoods, I think it's important to note that in Milwaukee, there's a very strong orientation toward the south side and north side of Milwaukee that's pretty much divided by a major highway that goes through almost the middle of the city. And Lindsay Heights is on the north side, as Gina mentioned, and Clark Square and Layton Boulevard are on the south side. So when the foundation was selecting neighborhoods, Lindsay Heights was the first neighborhood. That's where Joe grew up. And the board recognized that they wanted to pick a neighborhood on the south side, so they started with Clark Square. It's one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Milwaukee, and it's about 66% Hispanic, 13% African American, and 15% European American. And employment opportunities in industry once drew people to the neighborhood in droves, and this is the same with Layton Boulevard. But labor unrest and the industrial decline in the 60s and 70s really drove many employers out of the area, which left a lot of people unemployed and led to disinvestment in the neighborhood. Clark Square is 35 square blocks, has over 2,400 households, of which about 36% of the population are under the age of 18. Again, it's one of the most severely distressed neighborhoods in Milwaukee. 32% of the households live in poverty, housing vacancy rates of 11%. There's high crime in the neighborhood, low educational attainment, high unemployment compared to the city as a whole. So similar demographics to Lindsay Heights in terms of poverty, but in terms of the people living in the neighborhood, it's a different demographic makeup. The Clark Square Neighborhood Initiative coordinates the quality of life plan implementation, and that's actually governed by a council of people that's made up of volunteers representing residents, community organizations, churches, businesses, both within Clark Square and outside of Clark Square. One of the big differences you'll notice is the size. As Gina mentioned, Lindsay Heights is 110 blocks and Clark Square is 35. And that's actually something that we really have learned a lot about in terms of the 35 square blocks and the limitations that might have in terms of investment and people getting involved. In terms of organizations within Clark Square, it has some strong social and human service organizations, but neighborhood development was and continues to be a relatively new approach for the neighborhood. So when we were selecting a third set of neighborhoods, we looked to the south side to expand our footprint, and we moved into Layton Boulevard West, which is the next slide. And Clark Square and Layton Boulevard West actually share a boundary of a street called 27th Street. So when we went to that neighborhood, we expanded our footprint on the south side by 135 square blocks. Again, this neighborhood is located on the south side of Milwaukee. It's a relatively diverse neighborhood. It's 66% Hispanic, 22% European American, and 5% African American. As with Clark Square, employment opportunities in industry once drew people to the neighborhood, but then with industrial decline in the 60s and 70s, employers left, and that led to high unemployment. So very similar. 27% of the households live in poverty. It has housing vacancy rates of 7%, and it faces challenges from poverty, unemployment, and foreclosed homes. Layton Boulevard West Neighbors coordinates the quality of life plan implementation in that neighborhood, and it is one of the city's strongest community development organizations, which is a real difference between Clark Square and also Lindsay Heights. Gina mentioned that each lead agency has its own strengths, and this is definitely something that Layton Boulevard West has a strength in. And actually in this neighborhood, it's distinct that some parts of the neighborhood are considered middle market, which certainly isn't the case in Lindsay Heights and Clark Square. What's interesting is with these neighborhoods sharing boundaries, they've established some partnerships and have been able to work together over the past year or two around housing initiatives, employment initiatives, public safety initiatives, and we've really seen a benefit from that because although the neighborhoods are similar in a lot of ways, they do have some differences, but they've been able to work together to really learn from one another and build off each other's strengths.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much, Erin. Thanks, Gina. Thanks, Susan. I think it's interesting to see kind of the parallel of the way the two organizations work, and obviously there's a lot of similarities in the way you're tackling these issues. Now that we have kind of a background, it's a perfect opportunity for us to dive a little deeper and maybe hear from each group on challenges you faced and lessons that you've learned from those challenges. So why don't we jump back to our community solutions folks, and you can fill us in a bit.
Sure, thanks. This is Corinne Letourneau again, and you know, in thinking about a lot of the lessons learned we've experienced in the community, we thought we would kind of focus on this slide that really kind of shows some of key moments in the history of the partnership, but really these are kind of lessons learned around being in the neighborhood and how we should kind of integrate our work and prioritize focus areas. And so what this image kind of tells us is that, you know, the first lesson learned in being in the community and then starting there and rolling up our sleeves is that we need to understand Brownsville, and we need to partner with community members, and we need to invest in community mobilization. We referenced this before, but it was just in order to truly kind of help revitalize the community, we needed to really understand the community's voice and the community's needs. And so in addition to that, building on understanding Brownsville, so, you know, this image is really supposed to show that we didn't just stop understanding Brownsville in 2005. We're continually building off of that and continually understanding Brownsville. We're continually investing in community mobilization. But one thing that we did is, you know, even our neighborhood is over 90,000 residents. And then as an entirety, the neighborhood is very high need. But how do we kind of focus our efforts and potentially target the need and prioritize the need? And that's when we kind of really started mapping the vulnerabilities in the neighborhood. We started looking at the administrative data in the neighborhood. And that's what really drew us to kind of focus, especially our social service efforts, on the public housing blocks. Because when we actually mapped the administrative data, we found that while Brownsville is a neighborhood in need, the need is actually concentrated on very particular census tracts and in very particular housing developments of public housing. So we started kind of continually doing more outreach into those public housing developments, letting residents know about services we had available, and really trying to understand that, you know, while a neighborhood is, the entirety of the neighborhood is in need, we believe that if we're going to make an effect and target services, we should target services to the most vulnerable, and we actually mapped that vulnerability and started working directly with those blocks. And then the building the collective vision and focusing on whole lives, again, this is something we referenced with the backbone role, but that you really have to view these neighborhoods as kind of a unique ecosystem with unique problems, and we really need to target partnerships around addressing those pressing needs, but also thinking about how it must be to be a family in this neighborhood, and how if you're a family that's maybe experiencing a little bit of chaos, why should you have to approach that chaos in this kind of siloed approach that typical government entities or typical even sometimes funding streams force us to do? So if you're a family that has housing stability needs, but you also have needs for your child, why do you have to kind of work with various different case managers? Why can't we kind of collectively try to work together and kind of try to make the system more efficient for those families? And then when we say targeting the tipping points is an important lesson learned, this is a moment where we kind of really thought about what are the strongest needs in the community where we should be focusing our efforts. And this is where we kind of really aligned, like we said, the data that the administrative data is telling us, but also where the partnership with community members are what they're telling us are the biggest needs. And these tipping points that we really focused on were stabilizing vulnerable families, reducing violence in the neighborhood, creating vibrant places that goes to the physical revitalization, and increasing income. So obviously there's a lot of other need in the neighborhood, but these four kind of tipping point issues were the ones where we thought touched the majority of partners and organizations working in the neighborhood, and were the areas where we can kind of come up with what that collective goal could be in the neighborhood, where we can kind of convene everyone around it. So how do you draw people to work collectively together? We think it's by coming up with goals around these tipping point issues. And then lastly, that rallying around major goals, again, this is the mechanism, the approach that we feel is an important approach to take, where we could actually convene different groups of people to look at a goal that's neighborhood-based and really track the improvement that you're making. Because I think one of the issues that we've found in working in the neighborhood since 2005 is how can you actually track that you're making improvement? We completely agree with the Zilber Family Foundation that, you know, it's going to take a long time to turn around these neighborhoods, but what are some short-term wins that we could track that show us we're moving on the right track? And that's where we kind of have this rallying cry around utilizing a campaign methodology that Jackie referenced, this jobs campaign. Could we connect a large amount of Brownsville residents to employment? And so other key takeaways that we'd love to share with you is that, you know, in true partnership with the neighborhood, you have to build trust daily, and you have to acknowledge, respect, and foster new leaders. And then, you know, I'll repeat again, this partnership approach to tackle various issues is a critical way that we think you're going to be able to make change in Brownsville. And, you know, that key takeaway, though, is also one of our key challenges. I've referenced a couple of times, we really believe utilizing data. We really believe like really having people work together and form true partnership, not just kind of collaborate and be friends on the ground, but how are we actually working together? How are we actually working with the same families and trying to reduce redundancy around working with those families? How are we actually collaborating to ensure that all the different goals are being met in a strong way? And that's truthfully one of our key challenges that we face on a daily basis. I think we've made a lot of progress since 2005, but it's still difficult with various funding streams, only funding various services, and different nonprofits having to kind of account for, you know, having to report on those funding streams, and also just in, you know, getting different nonprofits and different government agencies interested in working on something that's typically outside of their scope of work. So, you know, how do we get the police department in the neighborhood wanting to work collaboratively with us on, you know, some of the social service needs that surround a family of a young person who's been arrested? These are some of the challenges we grapple with and we work with on a daily basis. And I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Jackie, who might be able to highlight some of those challenges a little more deeply.
Thanks, Corinne. So we really look at grappling with these, with the issues that come up across the community by taking a collective approach to neighborhood-based problem solving. And some of, just to continue with what Corinne was saying, some of our challenges around funding have really been not having key funding streams for our backbone quarterback work and that backbone quarterback role. Also, we found it very difficult to fund resident engagement. Resident engagement is key to the work that we do, and as we've showed previously, is streamlined into the way we do our work. However, proving that that process is necessary and getting funding for it is difficult. It's also very difficult to measure the impact of resident engagement. The bean counting participation is great, but we know that there's another way to measure that impact. Have we found it? Not quite yet, but we're really working to think creatively about that. Also, research and data evaluation is difficult to fundraise for. That's been a challenge for us. And going back to resident engagement, really building individual agency and capabilities amongst residents. So how do you inspire someone who, you have 10 other issues to worry about. You live in public housing, there's violence going on, and, we're really asking you to be a change agent and, tell me what you're most interested in, what do you want to see change, and then be that change. So building agency, building capability is definitely a challenge. And then developing emerging leaders in Brownsville, I'm sure across many other communities as well. There's a set of leadership that has probably been in power for many, many, many years. And, we definitely honor, respect, and acknowledge those leaders and collaborate with them. But there's a subset of people who have a lot to say, who are capable and willing. So how can we develop those individuals and really create emerging leadership in the neighborhood? And then rebuilding social networks is a challenge. Brownsville is like a village. Back in the 60s and 70s, people tell stories of Brownsville being this loving, warm place where everyone knew each other, everyone worked together in the midst of their problems and difficulties. And we can't say that that's what it looks like today. However, we want to continue to rebuild those social networks. We truly believe that in doing that will really help to connect residents to the support that they need and really create neighborhood or develop neighborhood impact. And then
Jackie, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know that we're kind of running short on time. There's so much great content here. So if you can wrap this up in like 60 seconds or so we can make sure to throw it back to Zilber. Thanks.
So just the last thing is that true partnership is logistically difficult, and I think Corinne did a good job of explaining that. So these are just three different projects that we have going on that really highlight some of these challenges and some of the successes that we can talk about maybe later in the Q&A. But we have a Rapid Results project, which you can Google. It's an international project that we tried to bring to Brownsville. We do house meetings and just community engagement around physical streetscape improvements. So I'll pass it on, and maybe in Q&A we'll talk about some of these cases.
Thanks so much, Jackie and Corinne and Zilber. So we don't waste any time, I'm going to pass it right over to you folks, and we'd love to learn more about challenges you face and lessons you've learned from those challenges.
This is Susan. With respect to resident engagement and capacity building, one of the underlying principles of our work is to make sure that the people who are most affected by the changes in a particular neighborhood are really in charge of defining what those changes should be. And so we have spent a lot of time investing our resources in building resident engagement and the capacity of a wide range of partners. And that over the course of the years, we've learned a lot about the different ways that various partners have capacity needs, how they express themselves, and the many different ways we've needed to build capacity and expertise and the skills among different partners. For example, intermediary organizations are very much a part of the work that we do, but we have found that oftentimes capacity is assumed with city citywide intermediary organizations where that capacity actually is not present. And so it's often important to really look hard at even well-established citywide organizations and ask whether they have the kinds of skill sets and the kind of staff that can engage with residents in neighborhoods. The second piece of that is that they're often, intermediaries are often beholden to a civic leadership, which could be at odds with what people in a particular neighborhood may want to see happen. I'm going to turn it over to Erin now to talk a little bit about the community-based organizations and their capacity needs and how we've worked with them.
Thanks, Susan. One of our goals is to build a resilient network of nonprofits and residents, people who live and work in the neighborhoods that we partner with, so that when our funding is gone, the work continues. And to that end, we as staff spend about 75% of our time providing technical assistance in a variety of ways. We all have different areas of expertise, so it really kind of depends on what the needs are. Some of our lessons learned in that area as it relates to the nonprofits and residents. One is building distributive leadership is important and it's very difficult. Related to that, nonprofits in neighborhoods play a really important role, but a lesson learned is that they cannot and should not represent the voice of residents. They have an important relationship with one another, but it's really important to stay connected to the residents as well as the nonprofit organizations. And also something that we knew but just kind of has been reaffirmed in some of our work is that residents living in these neighborhoods have a lot of competing priorities. And while many of them may want to volunteer to help to improve the quality of life in their neighborhood, they're working 2 jobs, 3 jobs. They have a lot of other things to consider. So while the desire is there, sometimes it's hard to align the activities, the volunteer efforts with resident schedules, and it's really important to be mindful of that. So, in terms of capacity building, we as a staff kind of monitor, observe what needs we think the neighborhoods and the residents have, but more importantly, we ask them. In 2011, we did an assessment, a capacity building assessment, with several of our nonprofits, and residents were represented as well. And the number one priority that they came up with was leadership development. So one of the things that we did was we worked with several partners in the city to develop the Neighborhood Leadership Institute, which is a 10-month program for leadership development for residents and nonprofit practitioners, as we call them, but teams of 2 people representing neighborhoods, 1 resident and 1 neighborhood practitioner applied, and we're happy to say that the first cohort completed its run back in 2013 with 25 people, and it was such a success that we are partnering with some other funders in the city to fund a second cohort. The first cohort continues to get together. We continue to support their efforts for networking and leadership development. There were some areas that they wanted to continue learning about. Racism was one of those, so we are sponsoring them to attend a workshop series in the fall. We've also had a funder invite them to a Brewer game, so they're all going to be networking. And one of the greatest things to come out of it, according to the participants, was that people who were living in neighborhoods doing very similar work had no idea that there were people in other neighborhoods doing similar work, and they were able to connect for the first time and really learn from one another. And when we really see this as building capacity among the residents and nonprofits, something else that has come out of it is a small grants program where some of our graduates of the Neighborhood Leadership Institute are serving as reviewers to make funding recommendations for resident-led projects in neighborhoods. So that's something that we're just piloting with the support of some other funders in Milwaukee. So those are just a few examples of the things that we've been doing based on lessons learned to help build capacity of residents and nonprofits in neighborhoods.
All of this takes a lot of money, so I'm going to turn it to Gina for a second to say a sentence or two about how we've leveraged the investments of the foundation.
So as I'm sure all of you know, the needs are always going to outweigh the resources. And so when we started the Zilber Neighborhood Initiative, one of the goals was to leverage our investment at least 3 to 1. And that was in 2008. And as the economy declined, that became more and more difficult. But we have encouraged our grantees to continue to track leverage. And so what we mean by that is for every dollar that the Zilber Neighborhood Initiative or Zilber Family Foundation invests, how many dollars are our community groups leveraging? And they've done this over the past about 4 years. They've tracked this, and it amounts to about $46 million in additional investment, which comes in the form of both financial resources, professional in-kind expertise, partnerships with other organizations, as well as influence around policy. So while we can't do it all ourselves, we really encourage our groups to use their leadership and capacity to reach out and network with other groups.
And then one last lesson about capacity building. A lot of our effort in the last few years has been focused on partnerships with other community development funders and banks in town to create a community development alliance that is a group, currently a group of funders, but eventually will be a group of funders and civic leaders who together will be investing collaboratively in making sure that the gains of recent years are continued, not just in the Zilber Neighborhood Initiative communities, but in neighborhoods supported by other foundations. And through that vehicle, at least 2 foundations have credited the Zilber Neighborhood Initiative with having changed their grant making at the neighborhood level. And so, we feel like we're having an impact. We also are incredibly aware of all that remains to be done.
Thank you, Zilber. That was fantastic, and we have actually had covered so much ground, so much wonderful content. We don't have very much time left, but I want to quickly open it up to the audience, folks. If you have any questions, we have a minute or 2 left, so now's the time. I know certainly after listening to that, I have plenty of questions. So if I don't hear from you, maybe we can throw one question to the panelists. Doesn't look like any audience questions are coming in. So I just have a quick question because we, and Corinne especially, you talked a lot about engaging partners around goals and around data, but, we also talked about the need for a long-term commitment, and what I'm wondering is how you guys reconcile the need for patience with these projects with a desire for short-term results around data and some of the goals you mentioned. So I'll throw that to either group, and I'd love to hear any responses.
Sure. This is Corinne. I can take a quick stab. We believe that patience is critical around kind of moving some of these huge needles on components of how do you create a thriving community, but that there are kind of sub-indicators that would show that you're on the right track. So, for instance, we want to, over the long haul, be able to reduce poverty in this neighborhood. One kind of shorter-term goal that we're looking at to do that is what is a large-scale number of residents that we could actually employ in the neighborhood, and what is data that we could actually track internally on a monthly or quarterly basis to make sure we're on the right track for that. So this employment campaign we're about to launch is going to be a span of 3 years. It's going to be large and audacious enough that we think it will have impact on the neighborhood. We're testing. We're not positive. And it's data that we could actually own and track ourselves and rally partners and community members around. So we're not kind of beholden to outside agencies or outside groups for those kind of pieces of data that tend to be kind of that longer term, those longer term pieces where you're tracking, poverty reduction, longitudinally, for instance. But we could track over 3 years through all of the different partners that we're working with how many people in the neighborhood we actually get connected to employment, and kind of that way rally people around something that's time bound and over a shorter period of time, but does connect up to something larger and longer term, like reducing poverty.
That's great. I actually had, yeah, did you have to jump in, Susan?
I did want to say a few things about how we think about it. We actually think about two different questions. One is documenting implementation, and the other is measuring impact. And with respect to documenting implementation, we look to the quality of life plans and the extent to which the projects or strategies in those plans are being carried out and what impact they're having at the neighborhood level. For each grant, we develop a chart of results that we ask grantees to report on about every 6 months, and we look across all of those charts of results to aggregate up the changes that are happening in neighborhoods. We also think it's important to communicate in story form, and so we have funded such things as a neighborhood news service that's documenting implementation, not just in Zilber neighborhoods, but in 14 other communities around the city, in the process educating people about the kind of things that have to happen in neighborhoods to make change, but also helping us to create a record or a history of the change that's happening in communities. We have also funded our neighborhood groups to collect resident satisfaction and perception data, as well as information about property in their communities. And they've created this baseline. Subsequent data collection efforts will allow them, as well as us, to see the change in the property in the community, the land use in the community, as well as the changes in people's lives or how people feel about the neighborhood in which they live. So we're trying to track both visible change in communities and perceived change in communities, both for the work that we're doing and in partnership with our colleagues in community development in the city.
That's great. Thanks, Susan. I know we're a bit over time. I had one more question come in, Community Solutions team. This was actually for you all. From our friend Kevin Ryan. Hi, Kevin. And Kevin was wondering if you can give us an example of how you support community leadership that is equipped to fully participate in community change decision-making.
Hi. So recently, we actually, in partnership and collaboration with the Municipal Art Society, we hosted a four-week, 8-session training called Livable Neighborhood Training, and this happens on a citywide level. Municipal Art Society opens this up for the entire city, but we really try to bring that to Brownsville and tailor all of those sessions around physical change, thinking about what short-term changes residents can implement, as well as what the long-term scope could possibly look like on a city planning level. So we had 8 workshops, 4 weeks, and about at least 25 residents actually went through all of those sessions, and it really, it really gave them, I guess, a sense of agency instead of oftentimes residents, will have these discussions and they, look to us as a partnership to be the doers and to really facilitate with agencies this change that they seek. For example, our bike lanes. We got bike lanes in Brownsville, and that was, took a lot of capacity within the organization to rally these agencies together to meet with residents. But instead, the livable neighborhood training, I'd say, really worked to put some of that agency on residents and really equip them with tools and also networks and connections, because all the people that came in, some of them were from city agencies or were connected to the work that was actually happening on the ground in other communities. We tried to bring examples from other communities about this change. So I think that's one way we really work to facilitate, to create agency among residents to be the change that they see and actually implement the change.
Thanks, Jackie. We actually had one more great question come in. I know we're a bit over time, but I'm going to throw it to you all if you have a moment. I know we're at about 4:05. This came in from Thais. It was an interesting question. Considering the often distrustful relationship between neighborhoods and city governments, what role do the municipalities play in these initiatives, if any? And a follow-up question to that, do you think these initiatives are experiencing so much success because they aren't being led and supported by government? So if either group is still with us and wants to take that, I think it's a fascinating question.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
I can take it a little bit about Brownsville. I will say we have a strong partnership with city government, with the different agencies that are critical partners to affect large-scale change in Brownsville, especially around physical revitalization. So much of these buildings are in public ownership, obviously the public housing buildings. So we have a strong partnership. That being said, you know, I think that it does take a lot of our work, especially my time as the director of policy, really trying to rally these agencies in New York City government to be focused on one neighborhood. For instance, you know, why would they not focus on a multitude of neighborhoods? Why would they focus resources on just this one neighborhood? So that's one challenge that we often encounter is New York City as a government needs to be equitable, and specifically sometimes tries to be equitable across all 5 boroughs. And what are some policy methods we could use to get them to kind of focus on Brownsville? So we've been successful in kind of, when they release RFPs, trying to prioritize Brownsville as a place where a program, intervention, or practice should happen, et cetera. I do think, though, that the question is excellent. I think the fact that we are a nonprofit entity partnering with the community has made it extraordinarily successful, especially around the community mobilization, versus just the government agency coming and speaking with the community. And Jackie quickly highlighted an example of this, but we've done a lot of streetscape work in the neighborhood and looking at how you can create complete streets around bike lanes, making things improved for pedestrians, et cetera. And we really brought the community together in partnership with the city's Department of Transportation and the city's Department of Health. And both of those agencies said it was one of the most successful efforts they've ever had in truly partnering with the community around identifying locations for bike lanes than they've ever had before, where it's typically just the government going to the community board and not utilizing a community organization as that intermediary, if you will. So I think we have some examples of how we help kind of spur a more successful collaboration and community voice.
Great answer. Thank you, Corinne. It's actually about 10 after 4, so we went over time. I didn't do a great job of managing time, but we certainly had a really engaging, fascinating discussion. Thank you to the attendees who stuck with us for not just 60 but 70 minutes today, and I really want to thank our panelists. We've never had so many panelists on a webinar, and this was really a great discussion. So thank you so much for participating. And for those of you who asked, this will be made available. This webinar recording will be made available on the EPIP website shortly. So please keep a lookout for that, and please make sure to fill out the survey that you'll be prompted to complete right when this webinar ends. Thanks so much, everyone, and join us in a few weeks. We'll be doing this again. Take care, folks.